And welcome back. Now that we have Firewall 1 all squared away with the default route, with data plane interfaces, I realized that in this topology, we have a few other firewalls to do some initial bootstraps on. So in this last video, let's go ahead and tackle Firewall 2, Firewall 3, and Firewall 4, just to get them up and running with their interfaces configured in a default route. So I have some consoles for these. There's the console for Firewall 2, and let's go ahead and knock that one out. So Firewall 2, I just changed the default password, and let me make this a little bit bigger as well. Then we'll configure the management interface, which is port 1, with config space system space interface. We'll do a show. So this shows port 1 as a DHCP client. We'll set it to static. We'll also set the IP address. We'll also include HTTP access. So we'll type in edit port 1, press enter. We'll do a show and set mode static. And we'll set the IP address to 192.168.1. And this is going to be .72. And the mask is 24 bits long, so we'll put that in. We'll do the set, allow access, include ping and HTTP and SSH, and we'll add others if we need to later. And we'll set the alias to management. I'll do a show. That looks good. All right, let's go ahead and type in end, and let's do the similar initial treatment for Firewall 3 and Firewall 4. So here is Firewall 3. I'll make it a little bit bigger. We'll do a config system interface. And we'll do an edit of port 1, and we'll set the mode to static. Set the IP on Firewall 3. It's going to be 192.168.1.73 with a 24-bit mask. And we'll set the alias to management. And that way in the GUI, it'll show up as that interface labeled as management. We'll do a show just to verify our work. Oh, and we need to do the set, allow access. And we'll allow ping, HTTP, and SSH, and we'll do a show. All right, that looks good. Let's go on to Firewall 4. So here is Firewall 4 over here on the right of our topology. I'll make this a little bit bigger. All right, we'll do a config system interface, and we'll edit port 1, and we'll do a show and set mode to static. We'll set the IP to 192.168.1. This is Firewall 4, so it's going to be, the management interface is going to be .74. with a 24-bit mask. We'll set allow access to include HTTP, ping, and SSH, and let's set the alias there as well. And we'll label that as MGMT and press enter. Let's do a quick show, check our work, looks good, and we'll type in end. All right, so from the CLI, we've bootstrapped and we put the initial IP addresses on the management interfaces for Firewall 2, 3, and 4. Let's go to the GUI and let's configure the data plane interfaces as well. Now, if we're already at the CLI, we also could do the data plane interfaces at the CLI if we wanted to. Either way is perfectly fine. So let's configure these in the same order. We'll start with Firewall 2. All right, so here's Firewall 2 at .72. We'll click on begin. We'll name it FW2. Click OK. Use the defaults for the dashboard, click OK, and click on OK. So this message regarding time sync should go away once we have a default route for it. It has access to the internet, and we've rebooted the firewall. And let's take a quick peek at our topology. So for Firewall 2, we have port 4 that's connected to the 10.123 network, and we have port 2 that's connected to the 10.2 network. So here on the left-hand side, we'll go down to Network, and with Network selected, we'll click on Interfaces, and let's do Interface port 4 first. So that's right here. So we'll go ahead and we can either click here once and click on edit or double click on port 4. Either way is great. I'm going to call this towards FW1 so that we see that interface label and we'll have an idea of which direction it goes to. That's the interface facing Firewall 1. And the IP address is going to be 10.123.0.72 with a 24-bit mask. And let's allow ping as well. And we'll accept all the other defaults for now and click on OK. So that is port 4 that's now done. Let's do port 2. So we'll go ahead and double click on port 2. And just as a reminder, port 2 is this guy right here that goes off to the 10.2 network. And its IP address is going to be 10.2.0.72 with a 24-bit mask. And we'll allow ping there as well. And we'll leave the other defaults in place. We'll click on OK. Next, let's add a default route. So from Firewall 2's perspective, the data plane is going to be forwarding traffic out to Firewall 1, who will then forward it out to the rest of the internet. So from Firewall 2's perspective, the default route next hop would be Firewall 1's port 2 interface address, which is 10.123.0.71. So let's add that static route. We'll click on Static Routes under Network, click on Create New, and there's the syntax for our default route. And the next hop is going to be 10.123.0.71. We'll hit Tab, and it's going to use port 4 because port 4 is on that local interface that can reach that next hop, and that looks good. So we'll go ahead and click on OK. And then I have this message about FortiGate time being out of sync. So let's go ahead and reboot this firewall. We'll click on Admin up here on the right, go down to System, and then select Reboot right here. For the logs, I'll just put Initial Config and click on OK. And it'll take just a few moments. While that's rebooting, let's go ahead and go to firewall number 3 at .73, which is right here. So we'll log in, click on Begin. We'll label this guy FW3, click on OK, use the default optimized dashboard, click on OK. And then on firewall 3, let's take a quick peek at the topology to make sure we get the right IP addresses on the correct interfaces. Always helpful. So here's firewall 3. We're currently connected on the management interface here, port 1. We need to configure port 4 and port 2. And the last octet we're going to use is .73. So port 4 is going to connect to the 10.123.0 network, and port 2 is going to connect to the 10.3.0 network. So let's begin. On the left-hand side, we'll click on Network and click on Interfaces beneath Network. And let's do Interface 4 first, which is right here. So we'll go ahead and double-click on port 4. I'm going to label this, as far as the name goes, I'm going to call it Towards FW1. That way when we see it, we'll know exactly where it is. And its IP address is going to be 10 on that interface, 10.123.0.73 with a 24-bit mask. And we'll allow ping, and we'll click on OK. And the other port is going to be port number 2. So we'll go ahead and double-click on port number 2, and it's going to have the address of 10.3.0.73 with a 24-bit mask. We'll allow ping there as well, and click on OK. So let me just take a quick peek here. So we've got the IP address on our management interface. We've got our .73 on port 2, and if we scroll down, we've got on port 4, we have the 10.123.0.73 address, and we're allowing ping there as well. And very similar to what we did on firewall 2, let's add a new default route so we can have this firewall access networks beyond directly connected networks. So to do that, still under the network section, we're going to click on static routes. We'll click on create new right here, and we'll specify that the next hop address for the default route is going to be 10.123.0.71. That's firewall 1's address. On that network, we'll hit tab, and it automatically is going to use port 4 as the forwarding interface because it's on the same subnet as the next hop. And that looks good. We'll click on OK. So now that we have a default route, let's go ahead and reboot this system. So we'll go to Admin, System. And the reason I'm rebooting it initially is I want to get rid of that time sync error. And so we'll go ahead and do a reboot. We'll put a little message for our logging and click on OK. All right, so while that's rebooting, let's do our fourth firewall, which is firewall number 4. Let's take a look at where that is in the topology. So this is firewall 4, and we've got the management interface configured. Now its port 4 is connected to the 23.1.2 network, and the port 2 is on the 10.4 network, and its default gateway would be 23.1.2.1, this router right here. So let's go ahead and configure those details on firewall 4. So we'll go through the wizard. We'll click on Begin. We'll call this FW4. Click OK. Use the default optimized dashboard. Click OK. And click on OK. So for its interfaces, we'll go down to Network on the left. Click on Interfaces. And let's start with port number 4, which leads off to the internet, or at least our pseudo internet here. And we'll double click on port 4. And its IP address is going to be 23.1.2.74 with a 24-bit mask. We'll allow ping there as well. Click on OK. And let's also do port 2, which goes off to the right to the 10.4 subnet. So we'll go ahead and double click on port 2. We'll assign it the IP address of 10.4.0.74 with a 24-bit mask. We'll allow ping there as well. Click on OK. And regarding port 4, let me go back and modify the alias for that just for a moment. And let's call this Towards Internet. That way, when we see that label, it'll remind us exactly what it does. Click on OK. And then let's add a static route. So to do that, we'll go ahead under Network, go down to Static Routes, click on Create New right here. There's the syntax for the default route all set up. And the next hop is going to be 23.1.2.1. And that's my little lab default router, providing access between our local 23.1.2 network and the rest of the internet. So we'll go ahead and tab down. It knows it's supposed to use port 4 by default because of the IP addressing involved there. And we'll click on OK. And so to get rid of this sync message, I'm going to go ahead and reboot it and have it boot up and then talk to the time servers. So we'll click on Admin, System, and we'll select Reboot right here. And we'll add a note for our logging and click on OK. All right, so let's go back to Firewall 2 right here. So Firewall 2 will log in, And in the dashboard, let's click on status. So I don't have the warning anymore about the time synchronization. That's great. This message here is because we have an eval license with the FortiGuard servers. And this warning up here is indicating that this license, the eval license, is only good for 15 days from when we deployed it. So that's just giving us a warning that the license is getting ready to expire. On the dashboard, let's click on network. And we have 4 routes, and we'll click on this to expand it. So here we have routes for 3 directly connected networks, and we have a default route that looks good. Let's also verify by going to a command prompt here, just by clicking here. We'll click here, and let's do an execute ping to 8888, and wow, I wasn't completely expecting that to work. Let's talk about why it is. In fact, let's also do an execute of traceroute to 8888, and that indeed is going to the live internet. And here is why. When we did the execute of the traceroute or the ping, the firewall had directly connected networks of the 192 for the management, the 10.2 for this network over here, and the 10.123. And so it looked at its routing table and said, oh, I'm going to use my default route. So it forwarded the packet over here to Firewall 1. And fortunately, Firewall 1 also has a default route, so it knows how to route out to the internet. But it also has a security policy that says allow anything, because we set that up when we initialized Firewall 1. So based on the security policy being very lenient, and it also doing network address translation for us as well, that's why that traffic was able to go through this firewall, up to this router, out to the internet, and then the reply traffic was able to come back. So let's wrap this up by taking a look at Firewall 3 and Firewall 4 and verifying that they also have the ability to access the public internet. All right, so this is Firewall 2. That looks good. Let's go to Firewall 3. We'll log back in. So this is Firewall 3. If we go up to Dashboard and click on Network, here's our routing. That looks good. We've got 3 directly connected networks. We've got a default route. And let's verify we have access to the internet. We'll execute a ping out to 8.8.8.8. And that looks wonderful. Okay. All right. That's Firewall 3. Let's go to Firewall 4, which is right here. We'll log back in. And on Firewall 4, just as a quick peek, we'll go to Dashboard and Network. And it also has 4 routes. And it's the 10.4, the 23.1.2, and the 192.168.1. And the default route has a next hop of 23.1.2.1. All right, let's test our internet connectivity. We'll go up here, click on the link for a CLI console, command line interface, and we'll do an execute of trace out to, let's go to Fortinet.com. All right, that means DNS is working as well. Fantastic. And that looks good to go. So right here at hop number 10, we have something that's unwilling to respond back to us with ICMP unreachable messages. That's okay. So not all the time will you get a perfect trace route all the way, but if we do a Control-C, let's do a ping to Fortinet.com, press enter. Yeah, that works like a champ, no problem. So in preparation for our next stage, here's what I'm going to be doing in the background as we go through these videos together, and I would encourage you to do something similar as you do your home lab as well. And that is this. I'm going to go ahead and shut down each of these firewalls by going to Admin, System, and Shutdown. For the comments, and it's going to put a character there so it accepts it. And go to Firewall 3, Admin, System, Shutdown. Okay. Then Firewall 2, Admin, System, Shutdown. A message there as well. And I'm also going to go to Firewall 1 and do the same thing, but I also want to share with you one other option that's available for gracefully shutting down these VMs before we take a snapshot. So let me bring back in my hypervisor. This is ESXi. So if we look at the virtual machines, Firewall 2, 3, and 4 are already shut down. And let's open up a console to Firewall 1 just for a moment. So here on Firewall 1, I'm going to right-click and hover over Console and then select Launch Remote Console, just because I want to emphasize the graceful shutdown aspect. So here on the left, I have my ESXi hypervisor. On the right, I have the console for Firewall 1. So we could shut it down from the GUI Firewall 1, but also if we have VMware tools installed, because I deployed this on an ESXi host, the image is deployed with the VMware tools, which gives us the ability to do a graceful shutdown of the virtual machines. So let me move these over a little bit so we can see a little bit better. So if we right-click here on Firewall 1 and we hover over Guest OS, this option right here, shutdown, is a graceful shutdown of the virtual machine, meaning it's like talking to the virtual machine and having it do a normal shutdown, as opposed to this power off with a little exclamation mark. That's bad news, because you could very well corrupt the file system on that little virtual machine, which we don't want to do. So under Guest OS, we'll go ahead and click on Shutdown. It's asking me if I want to do that for sure. I'll say yes. And then over here on the right, notice right there it says the system is going down now. So it's giving us a console message just confirming that that's another way in this platform to do a graceful shutdown of that VM. So now that it's shut down, let me close that and make that a little bit bigger. So now those 4 firewalls are shut down, we want to do 2 things. One is I want to remove any existing snapshots, and then I want to create a new snapshot so I can go back to this exact point if I ever need to. So here at Firewall 1, we'll right-click, hover over snapshots, click on Manage Snapshots, and I'm going to delete all snapshots. Click on Remove, click on Close. I'll do the same thing for Firewall 2, right-click, hover over snapshots, go to Manage, delete all, remove, close that. Go to Firewall 3, same thing, right-click, hover over snapshots, manage snapshots, and then delete all, remove, close, and then Firewall 4, right-click, hover over snapshots, manage snapshots, and then delete all, and remove. So behind the scenes, I'm going to be doing this a lot as I go back and forth between virtual machines. And I just wanted to walk through it with you 1 or 2 times just to make sure you knew exactly how to do it as well, should you choose to do so. So then I want to come back and make new snapshots for each of these. So with Firewall 1, we'll right-click, go to Snapshots, and say Take Snapshot. So I'm going to label this default route in place, which implies a few things in my own mind anyway regarding the state of that virtual machine. I'm going to go ahead and copy that as well, click on Take Snapshot, and then repeat that for Firewalls 2, 3, and 4. So Firewall 2, right-click, Snapshots, Take Snapshot, put in the name, click on Take Snapshot, and repeat again for Firewall 3, Snapshots, Take Snapshot, put in the name, take it. Then Firewall 4, right-click, Snapshots, Take Snapshot, and once again, boom. So generally speaking, we do not want to have a whole bunch of snapshots in place at the same time. It's possible, but the system's going to get slower, it's going to take more disk space, and also there's a possibility of corruption if you have just so many snapshots in place. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go ahead, as we proceed through, I'll get to like a next logical step with like a new security policy or something else. And at that point, I'll power off the virtual machine, delete the old snapshot, create the new snapshot, and move forward. Sort of like a mountain climber, hooking in periodically to a place they can always fall back to. So thank you for joining me in this set of videos regarding the initial bootstrapping and network configuration for our firewalls. And I'll see you in the very next video as we tackle the concept of dynamic routing with dynamic routing protocols like RIP and OSPF and BGP on the FortiGate firewalls. I'll see you there soon. Meanwhile, I hope this has been informative for you, and I'd like to thank you for viewing.